Good morning, good day, or good evening to all who decided to watch this piece on YouTube. My name is Vira, and I'm glad to welcome all of you on KONSTANTA Live channel. Well, today is 14th of November 2022, and let's have a look what's going on within the international screen. Obviously, every expert is following the G20 summit in Indonesia, and I suggest to talk about some interesting things in this regard. But first of all, I would like to share my happiness devoted to Kherson's liberation by Ukrainian armed forces. Glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes, and President Zelensky, by the way, had already visited the liberated city today, I guess on the third day since the occupation. But nevertheless, let's back to international affairs, and to begin with, let's have a look on several updates. First of all, for me, it was very interesting to know that Iran has become the most popular holiday destination for Russians. According to the ratings, compiled according to the results of research, I guess, Iran is now especially attractive to Russians. At least 20% is considered to go there for the New Year holidays. The second place is occupied by Turkey. And the third one devoted to Belarus. That's not interesting, I guess. Well, but the interesting thing for Ukrainian perspective, I guess, that the Iranian heavy transport aircraft arrived at Moscow Vnukovo airport from Tehran today. By the way, it could deliver a batch of drones. The arrival of the aircraft is reported by the flight radar portal. You can check it. There is no reliable reports or confirmation about what is on board. But Russian Telegram channel, they talked about the big batch of flowers, clearly, by the way, referring to another batch of Iranian drones. The Russian called them Iran. By the way, the previous flight to Moscow from Tehran was made on 11th of November 2022. Thus, I would say that Russia would continue to terrorize Ukraine with drones, and I hope so without missile strikes. But nevertheless, there is a challenge and the threat, and I'm sure that Ukrainian armed forces and air forces would be ready to deal with this. Again, about Russia. That's interesting that the demand for private bomb shelters had increased in the Russian Federation, especially after the so-called partial mobilization. The demand for such shelters even grew more. And of course, I believe that it's like a significant impact of Bavovna context. But at the same time, we should be very practical and pragmatic and talk about the, I guess, sanctions against Russia. And I was very glad to notice that US Treasury Secretary had made a claim, a statement, that sanctions against Russia may remain in force even after the end of this war. Of course, there is a significant period for post-war settlement, and Russia should pay and should be responsible according to international law for everything that have been done by the Russian army here in Ukraine. That's interesting to know that Russia was unable to produce not only missiles right now. Russia is unable to produce even the civilian aircraft due to sanctions, and the impact is significant for airplane industry in Russia. By the way, this year the Russian Federation will produce only 7 new superjets, Superjet 100, I guess, liners, contrary to the promises of the head of the Ministry of Industry and Trade of Russia to deliver at least 19 aircraft by the end of this year. Well, sanctions do really work, but at the same time, we need them to be strengthened. And it's interesting to know, according to the media reports, that on November 21st, the members of the European Parliament plan to vote on the resolution in which Russia will be called a terrorist state. Of course, the leadership of European Parliament and European Commission, they talk about the consequences of the Russian aggression, the terroristic methods of war. And of course, it's important that one voice position, one voice policy, and the Ukrainian Parliament had already registered the draft resolution to address the countries of the group G20. We are talking not about the European dimension, but also Asia-Pacific dimension. And it's very important that comprehensive approach introduced by Ukrainian Parliament as well as the Ukrainian government. And it's very interesting that the important role of G20 in supporting the sustainable development of the world economy also has very important sign that Ukraine would be among the top priorities within this year's summit of G20. And of course, each state that belongs to the G20 should understand that Russian destructive actions cost significant amount of revenues for all nations, despite regions, despite race, religion, etc., etc. Thus, to maintain peace and security and to act proactively in this direction should be among the top priorities for all states from G20. And of course, it's important to force to promote the understanding that Putin's Russia in such format shouldn't be a part of G20 or G8. By the way, since 2014, Russia was excluded from G8, group of 8, and that's reasonable to talk about the exclusion of Russia from G20. But nevertheless, I'm not sure that it would be a case this year, but nevertheless, the voice for such a step should be very strong. Well, I would say that it would be a great week, very important, very practical from the diplomatic perspective, but at the same time, we should pay attention to such aspects like impact of sanctions regime on Russia. And of course, to pay attention to the updates from the front lines. I believe that we would have very brilliant news on further liberation of Ukrainian territories. By the way, according to the estimations, Ukraine has retaken at least more than 50% of those territories that Russia occupied since February 24th. But at the same time, the great work is ahead, and on the occupied territories, there are so many extraordinary things to be done. Well, I would make a pause here. For me, it's obvious that we would continue our counteroffensive operation in the south and in the east. Well, wishing good luck to our Ukrainian armed forces. And of course, please subscribe, share, comment, ask questions, and to stay with us for other updates on international area as well as internal domestic Ukrainian politics. It was me, Vira Konstantynova, and have a nice, great working week.